Hello, everybody. How are you? I am, of course, still posting into the private community. How are you, Miss Carissa?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I am good. We've got some fun stuff to talk about today. I'm seeing myself double here now, so I'm going to close that because seeing double is not actually a good thing sometimes. It looks a little crazy. You guys, every time, Carissa and I are always like, how do we deliver the most value to people during Lunch and Learn? What are some of the key things to talk about? And in a conversation that we had a couple weeks ago, we dove into what I'm going to call the trap of novelty, right? Because we see it all the time. Heck, I'm like, ooh, look at that, look at that, look at that. Like sometimes like a little squirrel myself. But it is something that impacts people's health journey and their healing journey. And there's neuroscience reasons why, right? The way our brain is wired, actually that novelty trap plays a role. So like the brain gets bored and it wants to try new things. However, what ends up happening a lot of times is then we don't have that consistency, that rhythm, that repetition, that follow through. So, I mean, if you've ever, said to yourself, I've done that already, what else should I try? Right. And you've not gone back to the basics, or maybe you're like, this feels way too simple. I need to try something new. Well, that is what we're talking about today. And we call it the novelty bias. And it's one of the most common patterns that actually keeps people sick, stuck, and like spinning their wheels. Okay, because what it does is it tricks you into thinking that new equals better, right? It tricks you into thinking like, oh, I'm doing stuff, right? I'm moving the ball. And this happens to me all the time. So I personally relate to it, especially from that business sense, right? We got Lunch and Learns, we got podcasts, we got this, we got that, we got all this stuff. But you guys, when it comes to healing, it couldn't be further from the truth that new always equals better. Okay. Especially because the foundational, the basics, those are the most important ways to actually get results. And so while your brain might crave that new shiny object, your nervous system, and Carissa and I were talking about this before we went live today too. So it's timely, but our nervous system only heals when it feels safe, when it has structure, when there is the rhythm, right? In the true wellness framework that we have, T, tune in for your body, R is reconnect with that rhythm, right? Reconnect and rebalance, because if we're not having structure, if we're not having a rhythm, then our body doesn't feel safe. And when we jump around doing all sorts of different things, it's a sneaky pattern. I mean, how many of you have done okay, I'm going to start my new diet on Monday, right? And then Monday comes along and you're really, really awesome. And then Wednesday you realize there's a birthday party on Saturday and you're like, forget it. I'll start next Monday. And then next Monday comes along and something else happens. And that's part of that sneaky pattern, because our brain, it is always craving stimulation. And what happens though is when we're always bouncing around, the body doesn't understand what to trust, or it doesn't have time to begin to flow into the pattern. And so we can actually block our own healing, block what our body was designed to do. So today we're going to talk to you about the antidote to this, right? Repetition, consistency, follow through, basics, getting back to the basics. That's the foundation of the body-led movement, is being at those basics. So you ready to dive in, Miss Carissa?
I'm because I do love this topic because I see it with my clients all the time. And honestly, like you said, I catch it myself too. There was this moment where you've done something that actually worked. Maybe you're eating better, your sleep was more consistent, your mood started to shift. And then suddenly it's like you were saying, your brain is like, that can't be. That was too easy. What else should I be doing? And it's like we almost distrust the simplicity that actually heals us. And I think this happens because we're so used to effort being linked to struggle, right? And I think
Oh,
especially
yes,
for
yes.
women, it's almost like if something isn't hard or complicated, we question if it's even worth doing.
Mhm.
But the nervous system doesn't want complicated.
Yeah.
It wants rhythm, it wants repetition, and it wants safety. So I think if you're listening today and part of you is always looking for something new or feels like, well, I already tried that, it didn't work, you know, or sometimes it gets boring. That happens to me sometimes. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
oh, it gets a little boring.
Yep.
Um, but it's like we can kind of ask ourselves, like, did I really give it enough time? Or maybe I abandoned it for the next shiny thing before my body really had a chance to settle in,
Yeah.
because the basics, they really only feel boring when we haven't experienced the magic that happens when they're done consistently.
Yeah. It reminds me too, it's like so people often like, and this is a pattern, you guys. This is like part of being a human being. So if this is you,
Mhm.
this is not shame. This is part of being a human being. We're like, you'll do something really well for a period of time and you'll stick with it. You'll get a lot of results, right? And
Mhm.
then you'll kind of ease off in the things that you're doing a little bit. And then you'll look back and you're like, I'm not getting those same results anymore. And then you're like, well, what should I do? What should I do different? Right? Instead
Mhm.
of like, oh, wait a second, what was I doing then that I really need to be just doing now? We see this a lot, especially in weight loss, right? Where
Mhm.
it's like sometimes people, they'll be like really committed, they'll be paying attention, eating mindfully, getting in enough servings of vegetables and really focusing in on eating clean. And then they kind of fall into old patterns. And instead of going back to those things that are time tested and proven, right? They start looking like, okay, well, what's something else that I can do instead? And it's almost like we have a resistance to those simple things. I think I shared with Carissa. So I have one of my professors from school who is an amazing biochemist, amazing researcher. He is, head and shoulders always into the scientific literature. And he recently put together a program that I participated in on weight loss, and it was the top things in weight loss, and not a single one of those things was anything that is new or novel or different than what we do in our practice, but then what people know, right? So it's
Mhm.
not always about knowing, it's about the actual implementation. I think that's where people get messed up, right? They lose their grounding, they lose their footing when that happens.
Oh, yeah. I think, you know, like we said, the consistency, the rhythm, and everything you just said was so powerful, because it's not that people don't know what to do. It's that they kind of, again, stop trusting the value in doing it again. And
Right.
honestly, it's such a sneaky mindset trap, because the ego wants progress to really look dramatic.
Yeah.
It wants new routines, new supplements, new aha moments. And I've worked with clients that, they have the perfect protocol, they see something shiny and new on the internet, and then they're adding that new supplement in, or they're
They
just
throw
doing.
their protocol off balance.
Yes. And I had a client the other day that shared a video with me about this. She was a wonderful woman, but she was saying all the things that we talk about too. And I was like, well, luckily for you, you don't have to go spend money. We can work on that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
healing doesn't usually come with fireworks, right? Healing is about building that quiet momentum. And like you said, it's the foundational habits, the hydration, the blood sugar balance, the nervous system regulation, the movement, the mindset. Those
Yes.
things aren't flashy, but they work and they feel good.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think this is something that we're seeing. By the way, those of you who are watching, give us a shout out, say hello in the comments section so we know that you're there. But I think this is, think about it, right? You guys, our brains literally with social media, with iPhone, well, whatever kind of phones, just the activity of scrolling itself,
Mm.
whether it's your text messages or whatever you're looking at, or playing games on your phone, or all of that. Like, we're actually training our brains more
Mm-hmm.
and more and more for these patterns, which, like you said, Carissa, are not actually conducive to calming the nervous system. So yeah, it's a no wonder why seriously, like the whole world is kind of like this, right? But let's go deeper into the brain science, because every time we try something new, our brain does release that hit of dopamine. It's like what
Mm-hmm.
happens when you scroll. That's why you can find yourself, 15 minutes in, an hour in, and you're still like scrolling and you're like, what am I doing here? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Dopamine is our pleasure chemical. And this is why when we try something new, when we switch our dietary routine, or we change our routine for something that feels way more exciting, or we
Mm.
go away, or we try a new supplement, or things like that, we're getting that stimulation.
Yeah.
Okay. But what we're, like you said, what we're chasing isn't progress. It really is just stimulation. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of research on this, you guys. They look at something, they call it in the scientific literature something called repetition suppression. And what researchers found was that when the brain sees the same stimulus repeatedly, it actually begins to respond to it with less effort over time. Okay. So now you might think that, okay, the brain is getting bored, but it's not really that the brain is getting bored. It's actually that the brain is becoming more efficient, right? Your nervous system is learning, it's trusting, it's regulating, and it's saying, okay, I can do this. I can relax now, right? So that's what we want when we're healing. We want that efficiency. We want the rhythm, right? The R in the True Wellness Framework, that rhythm, that trust. We don't want necessarily excitement, right? Think about let me see here. Think about a baby who's learning how to walk, right? We don't give them new shoes every time they fall. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We encourage them to keep going, to repeat the same action until it really just gets wired into the nervous system, right? And the same thing applies on our healing journey, right? It's that pattern, that
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I love that you said that, because that's exactly where most people misread the signal. Like, when something feels boring or like it's not working as fast, it's actually often that sign that your nervous system is finally starting to settle. And we mistake that as a problem. And I really like the baby and the new shoes.
It's
It really was like, oh my
right.
God, I wouldn't do that. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So, and I think clients don't really say, like, it doesn't feel as exciting anymore, because they don't really understand that,
yeah,
you know? But if they do recognize it, or even the words that they do use, or if they say things like boring, it's like, well, good, because that means it's becoming a rhythm. And that's actually what we want. The brain wants to fire up with newness, but the body heals in
yeah,
safety and repetition. So you're dealing with two different things, and you kind of have to make them come together.
yeah.
And I just was reading a study just maybe over the weekend, and they were talking about how if you stayed away from your phone just for 72 hours, that you can actually rewire the dopamine and serotonin. And I
Mhm.
was like, wow, just 72 hours, 3 days of not being on my phone, and what a shift I could already get. You know what I mean? But I think it's important. I love that you said that, because then self-awareness is kind of key here. And then
Mm,
we have to kind of start asking ourselves, am I chasing stimulation, or am I building stability? Because healing doesn't usually come from doing 1,000 different things.
yeah,
It comes from doing the right things consistently enough for the body to trust that it's safe to change.
yeah,
So if you're here today and you're realizing that you've been jumping from one thing to the next, it's not because you're broken, or oftentimes I see clients feel like they're failing.
right.
It's because your brain's wired that way.
Yeah,
But now, when you understand this, that's why we wanted to bring this today, because you get to choose differently now.
Yeah.
And I think that's important
Yeah.
that people have a choice.
It's so true. And going back to some of what you're saying, right? That boring or things like that. You guys, the basics are the foundation of everything. Right. So if we're not going back to the basics, then we're not going to remain consistent on our healing journey. Because it like we said, it's not always about that new thing. It is about that consistency. And there's I think about some of our clients. I think about their journeys. I think about, the habits. I think about myself, right? Sometimes when we're always kind of searching, right? When we're scrolling our phone because we haven't had that 72-hour phone detox, we're we're losing connection to our body. When we're always looking outside for the answer, we're never paying attention to what's happening inside. It's kind of like, when you go through a detox or you go through a food elimination and you cut out a food for a while and you reintroduce it and you're like, oh man, I reintroduced that dairy and oh my gosh, let me tell you what reaction I had. And you're like, okay, well, it's a sign, right? Not to bring that back into your diet. But then, like over the next few months, you start to find yourself creeping in a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And yeah, there were no fireworks going off now because you've been slowly creeping it back in. But you may start to notice one that day that, oh my gosh, I'm a little tired. I'm a little achy. Isn't that weird? My joints are starting to ache. And you're like, well, why is that? Right. But what happened is over time and I'm using dairy here. Many people are sensitive to dairy. Not everybody is, but for the most part, but creeping over time, we don't even see it. So there's like there's this delicate balance that we have to play, and we have to pay attention to the brain because, they have what's called complexity bias. That's what it's called in the literature. The brain automatically assumes that if it's more complicated, it's more valuable. Okay. It's not the case, right? Not the case at all. But you guys, so when you're feeling like your wellness routine or the things that you're doing for your health, when they start to feel simple or familiar, like, going to bed on time, doing your breath work, you're taking your supplements, you might actually be unconsciously devaluing what it is that you're doing as it becomes that more and more comfortable. Do you get that? I'll say that again. So as things become more and more comfortable, because it becomes more and more routine, like we were talking about before, you might be devaluing the actual value of what it is. Okay. Those basics they're fundamental. They really are fundamental. And the consistency in how you apply things is key if you're actually going to get results, right?
Yeah, I want to go back to when you were talking about like drifting. And it's something that we talk about too in sessions, that the nervous system does love things to be familiar, right? Even if that familiar thing isn't good for us.
Yes.
It's like, I'm feeling stressed. What do I normally do? Grab, high fat food or high sugar food that's going to make my dopamine just fling, even if it's for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot with clients too, especially women who've had success. They start to feel better, and then they slowly let some of those old things sneak back in. And then suddenly they're like, why don't I feel good anymore?
Yeah.
And then when we backtrack, it seems like the basics kind of have gotten fuzzy, and then they kind of are just like, I don't know, they're doing things that they knew were not good for them. But things have just gotten a little fuzzy, and maybe it has now become boring, but it's not boring. It's foundational. So like you were just leading off with, like, just changing that mindset to know, like, the breath work you're doing is really the foundation. Right. And I know we've all kind of done it. And anyone that's listening and thinking like, oh, I've totally done that. This isn't about guilt. It's brings me to true wellness. It's about the R. It's about the reconnection in the framework, right? Reconnect and rebalance. So I think maybe if you're on here today, or if you're watching the replay, maybe it's the nudge that you needed to say, okay, maybe I don't need a whole new plan. Maybe I just need to go back to what was working. And, you know, and getting support. Support, I think, is really foundational. You know what I mean? It's really beneficial. Like, I support clients through this. I have support myself. You know what I mean? I'm not flying solo either. Because I just think it's really powerful. And that's kind of the point, to get back to what's working.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It reminds me of Jessica, right? She came in, she was exhausted. She had, seen 5 different specialists. She tried, 6 different diets. She like did 30 days of this, 60 days of that, and then like nothing stuck. And you guys, when we got back to the basics, when we focused on her circadian rhythm, right? That's part of your sleep and wake cycle. When we balanced the blood sugar, when we focused on the breath work, when we did the lymphatic drainage, right? To get the body moving, regularly scheduled meals, right? Like, first of all, she like panicked. She was like, that's it. That's all I need to do. She's like, that seems too easy. All right. I remember, but when she actually stayed the course after 90 days of repetition, right? Doing the same thing for the 90 days, like her sleep improved, her skin cleared up, her anxiety started to go away, right? And it wasn't when she got comfortable with her, like sticking with the basics, when being in that rhythm and being the routine, everything changed, right? I know we had her supplement protocol, and she was like inconsistent with her protocol everywhere. And then when she got that narrowed and started to make sure she was getting her digestive support and her minerals in every day, right? The most important keys, you guys, it all shifted for her. But that's the way that it goes for everybody, essentially, right? But you've got to come back to that. You've got to come back to that space. Okay. So it's so easy to let that novelty sabotage us, but that consistency, that rhythm, that repetition, it's foundational. Like you said, I'm going to steal your word. And the other piece, Carissa, that you said, I think is the ego too, because the ego does play a role, because the ego's like, oh, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I'm already an expert at this, right? I can't tell you, like, all of our clients come in and they're all, well, not all, but most will come in and they say, I eat healthy. I eat healthy. I eat healthy. It's like, we hear it all the time. Okay. So here's the truth. Okay. The ego does not like to repeat steps it thinks it's already done. Okay. And that's why sometimes people feel like going back to the basics is like a regression, but it's actually not regression. It's actually integration, because real transformation, it doesn't, like you said, look like fireworks. It really looks like brushing your teeth every day. Think about it. You brush your teeth every day for the last however many years you've been on the planet, I'm sure. And if you don't brush your teeth, you're like, oh God, I need to brush my teeth. Yeah. That's what it looks like. So when we can get our wellness routine like that, like brushing our teeth, right? When we get our meals, we're eating what we need to be eating. We're getting in enough fiber and vegetables and all of that. Everything starts to rebalance, but we've got to be doing it over and over and over again. Right? Yeah. That's important.
Yeah. And I feel like we can't stress that enough. And I feel like we do keep saying it. So hopefully whoever's watching or watching the replay, ask your questions about it. What's not making sense, or what does make sense? Because, when we come back to the mind and the body, how separate they are, right? Like, the ego does kind of use its protective skills. Overwhelm is one of them. But the body doesn't want more. The body doesn't actually want the overwhelm. It wants the rhythm. It wants safety, and it wants a schedule it can count on. And like you said, Dr. D, when you were talking about Jessica, like it wasn't flashy, right? It was the daily breath work. It was the blood sugar support, the regular meals, the right supplements, and consistency. That's what changed everything for her. And so I think as you're watching today, I want to offer, like, if you're doing the basics, but you're doubting them because they're not new, or they're not excited, or they're not what your neighbor Melissa told you was the best thing for her, just remember, consistency is where the magic happens. And
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, it's good to have that support, especially in the beginning, just to stay steady. And that's not weakness, that's wisdom.
Yeah.
Like, I love having the support and having people I can rely on, and just having that direction and things to like bounce off, because sometimes our mind doesn't see just the amazing things that we're doing. And we need someone else to be like, hey, hold on a second. There's a lot of gold in what you just said.
Yeah.
We just did group coaching, and one of our clients just spoke so raw and vulnerable. And at the end of it, she was like, sorry, I didn't offer anything. I was like, you offered it all. I was like, that was beautiful. There is so much to work with in there, So we have to learn to be okay with the uncomfortable too. When we're uncomfortable, that does not mean that we're failing.
No, we're pushing that edge, we're pushing that boundary.
Yeah.
We're in that little space of discomfort, and that can be a really good thing.
Yeah.
But I love what you said, Carissa, because there's probably an unpopular truth, right? The unpopular truth, and this is just from being in practice for the last 17 years, is that the clients who get the results, the best results, right? They're not the ones who know the most, right? Mm-hmm. They're actually the ones who follow through the most, who are focused on that consistency piece. So it's really not about having more information, right? Or new tricks. It's really about the courage to do what works and do it long enough for it to actually work, right? To actually follow through and to chase shiny new objects. And when we feel like things are kind of falling away or we're heading in the wrong direction, we've got to turn back around and be like, okay, what's the basics? Where have I missed the basics? Right? Where have I missed the basics? It's kind of like, here's a good one. Here's a good analogy. It's kind of like, you ever have a tech issue, right? And you're like trying to figure, why isn't this thing working? Why isn't this thing going on? Why isn't it doing this? And then you're like, oh, it's unplugged, right? How many times does that happen? Everybody? Yes. Yeah. Happened to all of us, right? Or the big thing is, my computer is not working good. When's the last time I shut this computer actually down and restarted it? So those are really, really, really important. And so I that's what I want to leave everyone with today. And I hope that this comes across and makes sense. I hope we've communicated it in a good way. But yeah, those of you who are watching, give us some feedback. Let us know what questions you have. What else, Carissa, before we sign off here in a moment?
Well, I just, I see it with clients all the time, especially when they're not feeling great. Their first instinct is to jump to something brand new. Like you just said, the shiny new object, a new supplement, a new cleanse, an overhaul in everything. But just like with the unplugged computer, it's not always about doing more. Sometimes it's about checking. Am I actually doing the things that worked before? Am I sleeping? Am I drinking water? Am I eating nourishing foods at regular times? Am I breathing, moving, pausing, listening? And is it important to me?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, life kind of takes over and we leave out the foundation, not recognizing that when we have a strong foundation, all that other stuff becomes just a little bit easier to deal with. And you don't have to lose things consistently, right? Sometimes we have a bad night's sleep. Sometimes we lack water. I'm talking about consistently, and we don't have to find some sexy new thing. We just go back to the foundation, because that's the different makers. It takes the courage to stay with the boring stuff. When your brain is chasing stimulation, it takes courage to stay with the boring stuff. And that's the real work.
Right. Otherwise, you end up scrolling Facebook or Instagram and buying all these different things that that are being advertised there, right? It's a marketer's dream. In fact, there's more stuff that happens at night just because your
Yeah.
brain is in that space. So awesome,
Mhm.
everybody. So where ask yourself, and maybe it's not in your health, maybe it's in your career, maybe it's with your family,
Mhm.
maybe there's other areas of your life. We're using health as a platform here, but where have you been chasing that novelty instead of committing to rhythm, instead of committing to consistency? Where have you convinced yourself that you need new versus actually going deeper and looking into it, right? It's not about trying a new recipe or new food. Sometimes it's about going back to your food diary and being like, where did my food diary go astray, for example, right?
Mhm.
Your healing is not, it's not a reel, right? It's not a highlight reel on social media. It's actually real commitment to what works. So remember that repetition is not regression, right?
Mhm.
Simplicity also is not weakness. There's a lot of strength in simplicity. I'm always saying to myself, when something feels complicated, there's got to be an easier way, right? There's got to be an easier way. And of
Mhm.
course, consistency is not boring. It is brilliant.
Mhm.
So if that has resonated with you, it's time to stop spinning really and start healing. Find that rhythm, find that consistency, right? That is really important. That's why it is the second part of our true wellness framework. So
Mhm. Yeah. So if you're feeling stuck, anyone, or things drifted off course, I just want to remind you it's not because you're broken. It might just be that your nervous system is craving the rhythm, not reinvention.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're playing on those sounds and letters today.
Yeah, so maybe today is your moment to unplug from the noise, reconnect with what actually supports you, and don't be so harsh on yourself when you go through those emotional growing pains, because it does feel uncomfortable, especially when we're used to scrolling or chasing things, right? To come back into the basics can feel a little icky at first, but I promise your body will start to love it. Your nervous system will start to enjoy it. Just give yourself a couple weeks of it, and then you'll start feeling that and getting into a new rhythm. So just don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah. Guys, look inside, not outside.
Yeah.
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 All right, everyone. We'll see you for next week's Lunch and Learn Live. If you
Yeah.
have questions, get them into us. If you want us to discuss a specific topic, put it in the comment section. We're always looking out. We're here to serve you and help you make a difference in your health. So we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Awesome. Bye.